Hi and welcome back. In this video, let's talk about Python logging. In the simplest terms, the logging module is used to print things out. Very much like the print function that you've used before, but the logging module is a bit more powerful. It can be used to print things out to a console or to a file. And essentially it's used to print out logs. I don't know if we've mentioned logs before, but a log is essentially everything that happened in your application. For example, you could have a log of your day in which you write down in some sort of notebook everything that happened in your day. You could have a log of a holiday in which you write down everything that happened during your holiday. And you could have a log of your app in which you write down everything that happened during your app's runtime. For example, whether an error happened, a critical problem, some information about some method that's running, basically anything. And these logs are used for developers to look into to understand how the applications are running. Of course, if you have a very small app, it's maybe not so useful. As your app starts growing, having some decent logging in there is going to be very handy. The good thing about the logging module is, well, one of the good things about the logging module is that it has various levels of logging, and you can sort of enable some levels and disable others. So for example, as you are developing, you may want to use the logger to output informative messages about what's happening in your application. Once you deploy your application, you share it with your users, and it's running, and you've got a lot of people using it, maybe you don't want informative messages, you only want messages that are related to errors. So with a logging module, you can do that. If you've got print statements everywhere, you cannot enable some and disable others. So the logging module, pretty cool. We can import logging. And the first thing we have to do is we have to get a new logger. So we're going to create a variable logger, and it's going to be logging.getLogger. And then we have to give it the name of the logger we want. So we're going to call it test logger. The good thing about this is that it's meant to be used across multiple files. So if you have a logger called test logger, and you call this from a different file entirely, it's actually going to give you the same object. And that's good because you can configure loggers to print things out differently. You can configure loggers to export to a file or to the console. So it's quite nice that you can do this so that when you get the same logger from a different file, it will be configured the same way. We're going to look at configuring them in a moment. Then it's very simple. When you want to print things out, all you do is you say logger.info, for example, and this will not show up. Or you can do something like logger warning, and this will. Then you can run it. And as you can see, you get warning, test logger, this will. Your informative message did not show up because by default, all loggers are configured so that they only show messages warning and above. So here are the levels that you've got. You've got debug, that's the lowest level. You've got info, that's the level above. And these two don't show up by default on new loggers. You have to say, I want these in order for them to show. The next one up is warning. These ones do show, as you can see, our warning message did show up. Then you've got error, and then you've got critical. Critical is the most critical one, of course, is the sort of most important. Debug is meant to only be used while you are developing the application. Okay, so again, use the debug level if you are developing or debugging, and basically things you don't want users, well, none of these are for users, but basically things that you only want to see while you are developing, not while your application is running for your users. And of course, if your program's about to crash because you found some critical exception or something, you can use logger.critical. The way you configure your logger is that just before you create it, you must say logging.basicconfig. And in here you can say level equal logging.debug in uppercase here. Or .info if that's the minimum one you want to show. .debug if debug is the minimum level you want to show. However, this doesn't quite work in REPL-it. So let's go over to PyCharm to give this a go. I've moved over to PyCharm now and I've just copied the code. So again, we have import logging, logging.basicconfig, where the level that we're going to show is at least debug. Then we've created a logger by calling logging.getLogger. And then we've printed out two messages, one that says this will not show up, and one that says this will. So let's run the app. And you can see that we get now the info message there as well. I think this is because the test logger here actually inherits from what's called a root logger. And I think that REPL8 has configured their root logger so that debug and info messages do not show up. So that's why that may not work in REPL8 for you, but it will most definitely work in PyCharm since you have control of everything. REPL8 is, after all, running the Python in their own environment, so they also have some of their own configurations there as well. Okay. Now, you can configure the output to show a bit more info rather than just the level and the logger that printed things out. In basic config, you can have something like format, and then in a string, you can put whatever it is that you want to format your log messages as. So for example, ask time s. This is, by the way, old school Python syntax for string formatting, and it's going to use the ask time variable that will be available when this gets used. The s means turn it to a string. So ask time s, for example, percent level name s, and then percent message s. So this thing here is going to look pretty similar to our existing message, but ask time is actually going to print out the time at which the log was printed out instead of the level. The level name is going to be printed out here, so what we're not going to print out is the name of the logger. If we run the app, you'll see that now we get the time at which we printed out, the level info, and then the message. I think this is slightly nicer, because now if you have a larger app and you've got a lot of logs sort of appearing, you'll be able to tell when each log happened. Then if you're looking back, you'll be able to see sort of, yeah, I logged this message at this point in time, and then I logged this message, and then an error happened. So you can then sort of reconstruct from these logs what happened in your application. Okay. If you want to configure your logger for sort of maximum readability, I've got an example that I think is pretty good. It's taken from Stack Overflow, but I think it's good. I'll paste it in here just for you, and I'll explain what it does. This here prints out the time, as you know. This prints out the level, but the level name is actually formatted as 8 spaces. So, for example, you have down here info that takes up 4 spaces. What the -8s is going to add 4 spaces after it. That way, all of your levels are going to take up the same amount of room, and your log messages are going to appear sort of one beside the other. Then, inside square brackets, these are just good old normal square brackets, we're going to print out the file name in which the log was printed out, and the line number as a number. That's what the D means. And then we're going to print out the message finally. So let's run this again, and now you'll see that this is quite readable and also quite useful. You're getting the time and what type of message it is. You're also getting where the message was logged, and this is fantastic. This is really why logging is brilliant, because you can see exactly where things happened. And finally, you can see your message there. Notice how it's quite readable. So I like this example here. Feel free to use this in your logging, of course, as you choose. Now I'll give you some other examples of a debug message. This is a debug message. You can do, of course, logger.critical. A critical error occurred. You can log these out, and as you can see, they'll all appear, and they'll all take up 8 spaces, because critical is the longest one, and that takes up 8 characters. And so this is pretty handy. Okay. Now, you can also log to a file instead of to the console. We're going to look at how to do that in the very next video. I'll just quickly show you. And this is how you do logs in Python. You'll see many large Python apps using this exactly, this logger, and it's really that simple. You just get a logger, you call it whatever you want. And normally it's related to your app or sort of to the part of your app that you're working with, and then you can log out messages. you normally see a lot of these messages being logged, because then you can choose to only show like error and critical in some cases, and all the way down from debug when you are working. So it's really quite nice. It's very flexible. Definitely recommend doing this. Do keep using print when you want to communicate with your users. Don't use logs to communicate with your users. They'll be very confused. So do keep using print if you want to talk to your users. The logs should be something completely separate, and they should normally go to a file or something like that. We're going to look at how to do that in just a moment. Okay, so that's it for this video. I'll see you in the very next one.